The self-proclaimed architects of the rules-based international order turned pale the moment Saudi Arabia dropped a bombshell that no amount of diplomatic spin could diffuse. $600 billion. That is the number. $600 billion in new trade agreements, infrastructure commitments, and energy contracts signed between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and BRICS member states in a single 96-hour summit in Kazan, Russia, between April 24 and April 27, 2026. Let that number sink in. $600 billion. This is not just a trade deal. This is not just an economic pivot. This is the loudest, most expensive, most irreversible declaration of strategic realignment in the history of the modern Middle East. The kingdom that has been America's most important Arab ally since Franklin Roosevelt met King Abdulaziz aboard the USS Quincy in 1945 has just placed the largest bet in the history of international commerce on the table, and the chips are not stacked on Washington's side. How did the world's largest oil exporter, the custodian of Mecca and Medina, the country that has anchored the petrodollar system for over 50 years, decide to shift its strategic center of gravity from west to east? Why did BRICS outbid the entire Western alliance for Saudi loyalty? What does $600 billion in BRICS-aligned commitments mean for the dollar, for oil pricing, for NATO's Middle Eastern security architecture, and for the 330 million Americans whose economic lives are built on assumptions that just became obsolete? Stay with us. If you want raw, unfiltered analysis, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop your reactions in the comments. The $600 billion breaks down across four categories that together represent a structural rewiring of Saudi Arabia's economic dependencies. The first and largest category is energy. Saudi Aramco has signed long-term crude supply contracts with Chinese state refineries, guaranteeing 2 million barrels per day for 25 years, priced in a basket currency arrangement that includes the Chinese yuan, the Indian rupee, and the UAE dirham alongside the US dollar. This is not the end of the petrodollar. This is the beginning of the petrobasket, a multi-currency pricing mechanism that reduces Saudi dependence on the dollar without abandoning it entirely. The contracts are valued at approximately $240 billion over the life of the agreements. The second category is infrastructure. Chinese construction conglomerates have been awarded contracts worth over $150 billion for NEOM development, the Riyadh Metro expansion, and a new Trans-Arabian high-speed rail network connecting Jeddah to Dammam via Riyadh, a project that will be built with Chinese engineering, Chinese equipment, and Chinese financing. The third category is defense. Saudi Arabia has signed a memorandum of understanding with China's AVIC for the co-production of armed drones, with Russia's Rosso-Boron export for the evaluation of the S-400 air defense system, and with Pakistan's defense establishment for expanded nuclear cooperation under the civilian energy umbrella. The fourth category is technology. Huawei has been awarded the contract for Saudi Arabia's national 6G backbone infrastructure, displacing Western competitors who had been assumed to be the frontrunners. The weapon systems in the defense package deserve specific attention because they signal a shift that goes beyond economics into the realm of security alignment. The S-400 Triumph, Russia's premier long-range air defense system, has a detection range exceeding 600 kilometers and an engagement range of 400 kilometers against aerial targets including stealth aircraft and ballistic missiles. Saudi acquisition of the S-400 would be structurally incompatible with continued interoperability with NATO systems because the S-400's radar frequencies and data protocols would compromise the stealth signatures of American F-35 aircraft operating in the same theater. This is precisely why Turkey's purchase of the S-400 in 2019 resulted in Turkey's expulsion from the F-35 program. A Saudi S-400 purchase would trigger the same consequence, effectively ending Saudi Arabia's ability to acquire American fifth-generation aircraft and forcing the kingdom into permanent dependence on Russian, Chinese, and indigenous defense systems. The armed drone co-production agreement with AVIC gives Saudi Arabia access to the Wing-Lung family of medium-altitude, long-endurance drones, platforms that have been combat tested in Libya, Yemen, and the Sahel, reducing Saudi dependence on American MQ-9 Reaper drones, whose export has been restricted by congressional oversight and human rights conditions that Riyadh views as intolerable interference in sovereign defense decisions. In Washington, the reaction oscillated between disbelief and institutional denial. The State Department issued a statement describing the Saudi BRICS agreements as concerning but not inconsistent with the broad framework of U.S.-Saudi partnership. Behind closed doors, the language was reportedly less diplomatic. The $600 billion figure represents approximately 3 years of total U.S.-Saudi bilateral trade concentrated into a single package directed away from the dollar system, away from American defense suppliers, away from American technology companies, and toward the very countries that the American strategic establishment has identified as its primary competitors. In London, the City of London Financial District began modeling the implications for pound-denominated oil futures and concluded that the petrobasket pricing mechanism, if adopted by other Gulf producers, would reduce global demand for dollars by an estimated 8 to 12% within 5 years, a shift large enough to affect U.S. Treasury bond yields, dollar exchange rates, and the Federal Reserve's ability to run deficits without inflationary consequences. In Beijing, the reaction was controlled celebration. China's National Petroleum Corporation immediately announced that the 25-year supply contract with the Aramco would be settled through the Shanghai International Energy Exchange in yuan-denominated futures, a milestone that Chinese strategists have been pursuing for over a decade. In Moscow, the agreements were framed as vindication of Russia's long-term strategy of building an alternative international economic architecture outside Western institutional control. In Abu Dhabi, the UAE is studying the Saudi model with intense interest, because whatever path Saudi Arabia takes, the smaller Gulf states will follow within 12 to 24 months. In Doha, Qatar has already signed its own LNG supply agreements with Chinese buyers denominated in yuan. In New Delhi, Indian strategists see the Saudi pivot as confirmation that the era of unipolar American dominance in the Gulf is ending, and that India must accelerate its own bilateral relationships with Gulf producers to secure energy supply independent of American intermediation. In Islamabad, the defense cooperation component of the Saudi BRICS package is being interpreted as a potential lifeline for Pakistan's struggling defense industry and a pathway to deeper strategic alignment between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China. First, the $600 billion package is not a negotiating tactic. It is a structural realignment backed by signed contracts, construction timelines, and financial commitments that cannot be reversed by a phone call from the White House. Second, the petrobasket pricing mechanism is the most significant threat to dollar hegemony since the creation of the euro, because it establishes a precedent that the world's largest oil exporter can price its most important commodity in currencies other than the dollar without suffering economic consequences. Third, the defense component of the package, particularly the S-400 evaluation and the drone co-production agreements, signals that Saudi Arabia is prepared to sacrifice interoperability with American military systems in exchange for strategic autonomy, a trade-off that Turkey has already made and that the UAE is reportedly considering. Fourth, the technology component, specifically the Huawei 6G contract, places Chinese telecommunications infrastructure at the heart of Saudi Arabia's digital economy, creating intelligence sharing and data security complications that will further strain the U.S.-Saudi security relationship. Fifth, the cascading effect on other Gulf states will amplify the impact. If Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman follow the Saudi model within the next 2 years, the United States will face a Gulf region that is economically aligned with BRICS, defensively diversified away from American systems, and diplomatically positioned as a bridge between East and West rather than as an American client bloc. The old alliance is dying. The alliance that was sealed aboard the USS Quincy in 1945, maintained through 50 years of oil for security arrangements, and sustained by the assumption that Saudi Arabia needed American military protection more than America needed Saudi oil. That assumption died the day the kingdom signed $600 billion in contracts with the countries that Washington told Riyadh to fear. Saudi Arabia did not just switch sides. Saudi Arabia proved that in the new world, there are no sides. There are only interests. And the country that serves those interests most effectively wins the partnership, regardless of history, regardless of alliances, regardless of the sentimental mythology of friendships between nations that were never friends, but always customers. What do you think this means for the dollar? Will the petrodollar survive 5 more years? Or has the basket already replaced it? Drop your honest analysis in the comments. We read every single one. If this opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay sharp.